It's that time of year again where you might be thinking about jumping into an MMO like The Elder Scrolls Online, either as a new purchase or getting started for the first time. In this video, we'll answer the question of should you play ESO now and moving into 2024. First, let's talk about what might be the most important factor for you when committing to an MMO, and that is the cost. Now, The Elder Scrolls Online is not a free-to-play title, probably won't be for some time to come, but one of the advantages of ESO in today's marketplace is just how low the cost is to get started. I mean, frequently you can find this game on sale for as low as $5, and the game is still included in Game Pass at the time of this video, which means your access could potentially even be free. From what I've seen, ESO is always looking to grow its player base, so it makes sense that the barrier to entry is pretty low to get you in and engaged, and that's not a bad thing. Getting in on the ground floor and purchasing the base game of ESO will unlock hundreds of hours of content, including multiple adventure zones fans of the Elder Scrolls franchise will be familiar with, 4 powerful classes, amazing fully voice-acted quests and stories, solo content, group dungeons, 12 player trials, and even the brand new Endless Archive, which is a procedurally generated dungeon for 1 or 2 players with infinite content. Now, I'll talk more about the value proposition of ESO in just a minute, but at that lowest level of just purchasing the base game or picking it up on Game Pass, there's plenty here to keep you playing all year long. Before we get started, special thanks to today's video sponsor, Watcher of Realms. You've no doubt seen other Hero Collection games before, but nothing like this. With Watcher of Realms, a new experience awaits. In this epic next-gen fantasy RPG for PC and mobile devices, players control over 100 powerful heroes in unique real-time and 360-degree battlefields as you fight your way to ultimate victory. And unlike other collectible hero titles, Watcher of Realms never skimps on giving players powerful heroes for free, and the probability of drawing a legendary hero is exceptionally high. And you'll need all the advantages you can get. In Watcher of Realms, each stage poses new challenges and commanders must choose the best faction and hero combinations to survive. Charge into battle with your fearless heroes and activate their ultimate skills, AoE or magic damage, and healing spells with precision timing to defend your position. And because combat is 360 degrees and real time, when you decide to use each skill and even the direction of your hero's attacks is critical. And of course, passing each stage will bring abundant rewards and loot. Upgrading your heroes is even easier. Players just need one click to upgrade and equip heroes, which doesn't require any resources at all, making sure you get back into the live action combat as fast as possible. But in Watchers of Realms, a new experience always awaits you, like their newest faction with even more powerful heroes called the Supreme Arbiters, or the new game mode Boss Rush, where players need to defeat different epic bosses with a focus on strategy. New Camp PK activities challenge players to compete head-to-head against each other for even greater rewards, and during the new Christmas event, players can collect hero shards to get a powerful legendary hero for free and can also get a free skin just through daily login Christmas events. The activity link and everything you need to get started is down in the description below, so what are you waiting for? Click the link down below to get started with Watcher of Realms. When it comes to DLC content and expansions, the conversation around ESO gets a little bit more complicated. ESO is actually entering its 10th year as an MMO and has maintained quarterly DLC releases for most of its entire existence, so there is a ton of DLC content which can be added on. Now, this takes multiple forms, including story zones, dungeon packs, as well as chapter releases, which is ESO's term for a larger expansion. Now, each DLC has its own price, usually starting around $15 for a story zone or dungeon pack, and around $40 US for a chapter expansion, though the DLCs and even chapters do go on sale for a lower price quite often. But this does give you the freedom to pick and choose which additional content you want to purchase and play based on your interests. Of course, there's also the optional ESO Plus subscription. That's $15 a month, and that gives you access to all previous story zones, dungeon DLCs. It's quite a deal now when you consider the 10 years of content that it now contains. Devs are even adding in those older chapter expansions into ESO Plus as well, like Somerset, Blackwood, and so on, which provides even more value. Now, the newest chapter is not going to be part of the ESO Plus subscription. That always needs to be purchased separately, so that's something to keep in mind when you see news about the exciting latest ESO expansion. It's always going to be a separate purchase. But those are the two basic options in terms of DLC content access: pay as you go or the one-stop subscription. The subscription also offers more value, such as the monthly allowance of the game's premium currency called crowns, We'll talk a lot more about the Crown Store in just a few minutes, but also faster XP progression, faster research for crafting, and a lot more perks. But to be honest, the biggest reason most people end up keeping their ESO Plus subscription is for the limitless craft bag, where you can store as many crafting supplies as you want, pull them out anytime you want as well. This is a huge time saver. It's one of the most impactful things at the game, especially playing towards endgame, where without it, especially if you want to craft, is going to be a challenge. But let's break down the content next into solo content versus group play. As a massive multiplayer online RPG, The Elder Scrolls Online has a surprising amount of solo content. And this is no doubt due to the game's place in the Elder Scrolls universe, which is dominated by popular single-player titles like Skyrim, Oblivion, and eventually The Elder Scrolls 6. And now looking at things from face value, ESO actually has the most solo-style content of any Elder Scrolls game right now. It's actually much larger than those previous titles that I mentioned, with the amount of playable areas you can travel to. Zones like Morrowind, Cyrodiil, Skyrim, and tons more. All of these are included as part of ESO. Now obviously the scale is not the same, and you're going to find more explorable content in, let's say, the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim versus ESO's versions of Skyrim, which covers multiple zones, by the way, in ESO. But the fact remains that if you're looking for new, playable Elder Scrolls content, ESO is the only title currently doing that now, and has been consistently doing that for the last 10 years. So how is the solo content? Well, you can solo a lot of things in ESO, including the main stories, world bosses, side quests, even some dungeons, which are quote-unquote group dungeons, can still be soloed if your build is good enough. And ESO even added the option for NPC companions a few years ago to help players solo even more content without a god tier build necessarily, which is great because with so many solo options, you never have to worry about waiting for your friends to log in before you can actually do something enjoyable. And as mentioned, ESO even added the new Endless Archive dungeon recently, which players can technically solo as much as they want as repeated content with increasing difficulty. However, outside the Endless Archive, which we mentioned, most content that's intended for solo gameplay, such as overland zones and story quests, is straight up easy mode and will never get more challenging regardless of your level. In fact, in ESO, your character's stats are actually much higher the lower your level is, and this is due to level scaling. The level scaling system was turned on several years ago to make grouping up for content easier, and it does exactly that, meaning that a level 30 and a champion point 360 level character can actually group up and do the same dungeon without the level 30 getting instantly evaporated, which is a pretty good thing. But at the same time, this system of level scaling does tend to take the challenge out of most of the solo content in ESO. Soloing in this game feels a lot like a story mode difficulty in some titles. Many players, including myself, would love to see something like more difficult solo instances or hard mode content come to ESO's stories and solo gameplay. Mechanics which already exist for the group content, by the way, we'll talk about that in a second. That said, if you're playing ESO solo, it's most likely not for the challenge of combat, but instead for the story and the expansive world you're able to explore. As we mentioned, ESO has dozens of overland zones at this point, many of which are huge and will take several minutes to traverse from one end to the other. Most of these have major towns and settlements, as well as multiple mini dungeons called delves, public dungeons as well, which are a little bit more difficult. But the crown jewel in ESO's experience for soloists and for role players out there is definitely the questing and the story content itself, especially the fully voice acted NPCs. Now, there's also a ton of freedom in terms of where you can go and when. Since none of the overland zones are level capped, as we mentioned, literally every section of Tamriel will be open to you from the start of your adventure, as long as you own the required DLC. Now, in terms of rewarding adventuring soloists, it's important to keep in mind that while you can play ESO like a single-player Elder Scrolls game if you want, the game's overall reward and itemization structure is still 100% based on an MMO. For example, players in ESO can collect pieces of armor sets from any boss in the current zone, and these set pieces will give you stacking bonuses for equipping 2, 3, and 4 pieces, plus a unique 5-piece bonus, which feels very MMO-ish for lack of a better word. But since overland content is not difficult at all, most of these overland set bonuses are not particularly powerful. And if you think that by completing that epic, 10-hour story quest, you'll get an impactful weapon or unique piece of armor like you did in Skyrim, well, no. You'll most likely just get another basic 5-piece set item that maybe has a different name. This is something I would love to see ESO improve on in the future when it comes to its solo and story content, so that the rewards you earn match the amount of time a player puts in. Now, to be fair, ESO is improving some of its other reward structures, which we started to see glimpses of in 2023, especially through their achievement system, and more rewards like mounts and pets and cosmetics can be earned now by completing overland and story achievements, but the best weapons and armor still are generally found by farming gear drops over and over in the group dungeons and trials in true MMO fashion. Onto group content next, where ESO shines even brighter in my opinion as we start getting into the more challenging and inspired content of the game, that's including 4-player dungeons and 12-player trials. And though you can group up in ESO at any time and for any content, it's the 4-player dungeon experience which has really shaped the game since its beginning. ESO's dungeons are handcrafted experience designed for groups of 4 players. Dungeons in ESO are more than just combat challenges, they also have stories that tie back into the larger lore of Tamriel. Each dungeon feels unique and it has distinct themes and enemy types, and some dungeons, especially the newer ones, also include puzzles and secret areas and hidden bosses, so there's plenty of incentive to come back and repeat these over and over. But unlike the overland and the story content we mentioned earlier, dungeons and trials in ESO actually do have different difficulty instances. These are normal, veteran, and some hard mode difficulty settings for certain bosses, and this allows groups of ESO players to tailor their dungeon experience to better fit the group's experience level while also improving the rewards that you get, which is a nice addition. And then there's trials, which are ESO's versions of raids. These are designed for larger groups of 12 players, and these are the pinnacle of group content in ESO, offering the most challenging and complex encounters in the game, sometimes taking groups weeks or months to master. And that's because trials are not just about fighting tougher enemies, they involve more intricate mechanics that require every member of the group to play their part effectively. This includes like managing the group's position, handling specific mechanics for bosses, dynamic changes during encounters, things like that. And speaking of group roles, ESO does live by the tried and true holy trinity of MMO roles, talking about, of course, damage dealers or DPS, healing, and tanking. Generally speaking, if you want an easier style of play, a damage dealer is where it's going to be slightly easier, though perfecting your rotation can be a challenge. Healers and tank builds tend to be a bit more challenging, as well as those are going to be more reactive and require more knowledge of each encounter and specific mechanics to be successful. In terms of rewards, group content tends to be the most challenging in the game, so you'll also get the best rewards from these activities, including the best sets with the best bonuses for your build. Monster sets from dungeons, which recreate the effects of a unique boss, are pretty interesting as well, and trial sets tend to be the best with the most powerful offensive and defensive buffs you can't find anywhere else. Group content in ESO also tends to have a larger percentage of achievement-based rewards, talking about unique skins, unique mounts, and personalities to further customize your character and incentivize completing this more difficult content. But that brings us to the next question, which is ESO pay to win? Now, ESO does have an extensive cash shop with everything from basic consumables to quality of life upgrades, cosmetics, to the previously mentioned DLCs and chapter releases. Now, most of these items don't make ESO players more powerful directly, but instead provide convenience or utility. So while the crown store for ESO may not be blatantly pay to win, it's not great for players either, especially new players, I would say. And that's because you might be prompted at times to purchase something on sale that you didn't know you could already get for free in-game without spending real-world money, like respecking your character, buying food or drink buffs, or getting experience scrolls to level faster. In many cases, there are actually plenty of free alternatives in the game, like I said, that just take a little bit more time. So be sure to do your research before buying anything, especially if you don't want to waste your crown allowance, which is included in the ESO Plus subscription, because you can use that to save up for some nice cosmetics. But the crown store is also unfortunately where some players can quickly get sucked down the rabbit hole of loot crates. And that's because if you see something shiny that you want here, like an Apex mount, you could easily end up dropping a few $100s on random crates until you finally get the drop that you want. Now, yes, there are systems in place now that make things more, quote, fair, such as the Crown Gem system, where you can basically trade in your unwanted items that you got from crates for gems to eventually buy what you want. And then there's also the relatively new Endeavors system, and this one lets you earn your way towards the same premium mounts and other rewards by completing in-game challenges, but that's going to take a lot more time. We're talking months, not weeks. So microtransactions are a big part of ESO, whether you choose to participate or not, and it is something to be aware of. Whether or not paid DLC content is technically pay to win, I think is another relevant topic because as we mentioned earlier, the best item sets tend to come from the new content, especially new chapters that you need to pay for, which are not included in the ESO Plus subscription. The best example I can think of recently in ESO are mythic items, which are powerful one-piece item sets that give massive stat bonuses or let you play in different ways, but typically require a few DLCs to unlock in most cases. This was really noticeable about 2 years ago with the release of a mythic item called the Oaken Soul Ring, which gave lots of powerful buffs to players and eventually had to be nerfed because it was just so good. Which leads to the next con I would say for ESO, and that is balancing. Now I believe the devs have gotten much better at this over the past year or so, but not without some tribulation leading up to that. As an MMO with frequent content releases, there are balance patches which come about that can change how your favorite class plays and performs. Some skills might get buffed while other skills get nerfed, or even your favorite item set which you farmed for hours to complete may end up different in a future patch because it didn't fit into the overall balance the developers were trying to achieve, and now you've wasted that time. Now, I don't think these kinds of situations are unique to ESO. As an MMO player, you should probably expect some regular balance patches to hit any type of live service game, but just know that the quote meta or the flavor of month build in ESO is pretty fragile and it does tend to change almost every patch. So if you're interested in always having the best gear or the best performing build with the highest DPS, you will need to adapt to the game as it changes and updates. For me personally, and I think for a lot of ESO players out there, we just play the game the way that we want to play it anyway, so those kind of meta shifts really don't affect us that much, but it is something to keep in mind, especially if you're pushing for competitive endgame scores. But that brings us to my favorite point about ESO, and a definite pro here, and that is character builds and theory crafting. With now 7 classes, hundreds of skills, and I think 500 plus different item sets in the game at this point, the possibilities for creating the build of your dreams are literally endless. And if you're a follower of this channel, you know I've created hundreds of build guides by now, and I am super addicted to the variety of gameplay ESO provides. From just one class, you can play so many different ways, from solo to group gameplay, PvE or PvP focused, healer, tank, DPS, support, it's all there. ESO even created a built-in armory system which lets players store and customize their own builds to instantly respec, which is amazing, and is perfect for some players who just want to have one character as their main, but still be able to switch to different playstyles. Now myself, on the other hand, I have my character slots maxed out, which I think is around 18 at this point, so I have multiple characters of every class, which I build up and customize over time into different roles and playstyles, which is how I prefer to play, but whatever works for you is fine. But that brings me to another positive for ESO, and that is the leveling process. Now, I actually love leveling up new characters in the Elder Scrolls Online. I think it's actually one of my favorite things to do in the game because of the way character progression works. Unlocking new abilities and playstyles through the skill trees just feels very dynamic to me, and it's actually pretty fast as well. The basic level cap in ESO is level 50, which you can honestly hit in just a few weeks or even days if you are playing a lot. Now, that doesn't mean your character is done at that point either, because after level 50, you then start getting into champion point levels, which unlock even more power for your character, and the maximum champion point level is 3,600. So yeah, you're not going to hit that anytime soon. But what's really great about ESO is your champion point levels are account-based, not character-based. So my main character is, let's say, CP level 500. If I decide I want to create a new character back at basic level 1, the new character can immediately go into the champion point system and use all 500 of those CP levels to get more power at level 1. Which is really fun and also makes it that much easier to level up that new character even faster. And by the way, if you're curious about how gear and levels interact, gear does drop for you at your current level, all the way up to the gear level cap, which is champion point 160. So there really is no point in farming gear before CP 160, as ideally you want all of your gear to be at that gear cap to have the best stat bonuses. So I tend to use just whatever random pieces I pick up before that point, because I'm just going to throw it away once my character reaches the cap and can use max level gear anyway. Combat in ESO is another thing that I really enjoy as well, but it's also something that quickly turns off some new players. I think if you come to ESO from the single player games like Skyrim, then combat definitely feels very different. ESO combat is also different from other MMOs, which tend to be more tab target focused, with lots of abilities with long cooldowns and such. ESO just feels different. It is very skill based. I mean, you will have literally dozens of different abilities when your character gets to endgame, but you are also limited to just 2 skill bars of those abilities that you then switch between, or bar swap is what we call it. So strategizing about your skill selection is a big part of the game. Each skill can even be morphed into one of 2 additional options, which adds more depth to the system, though sometimes the morphs aren't as different or unique as you might want. And your skills cost resources to cast. They don't have cooldowns. The cost is either magicka or stamina, depending on the skill. So then resource management also comes into play. And this is the most challenging aspect of combat that I've seen for new players especially, because running out of stamina means you can no longer get up if you knock down, for example, and running out of magic might mean you can't cast any more defensive or healing skills anymore. So without being able to balance your sustain of those resource pools, your character becomes pretty much dead in the water. There is also a pretty big learning curve to combat overall. As I mentioned earlier, if you're playing solo or quest content though, you shouldn't really have any issues because enemies just are not that challenging in the overland content. But there is a huge difficulty spike if you then try to get into those veteran dungeons or trials as you approach ESO endgame, and there's actually not a lot of middle ground or training opportunities to help bridge that skill gap. This is where the social aspect of ESO becomes very important. If you like to play your Elder Scrolls games solo as a single player RPG, that's fine, and ESO will actually give you hundreds of hours of content if you decide to play this way. However, some of the most advanced and difficult content in ESO does require a group. This is an MMO after all. So if you plan to play everything there is to do in this game, you want to start making friends and then join a guild as soon as possible. And believe me, the ESO community is full of great people who will gladly teach you how to improve your build or survive the most difficult dungeon mechanics. And there's even an in-game guild finder tool to help you get started, letting you search for the exact type of guild you're looking for, and you can even join more than one. Now, ESO also introduced a new in-game activity finder, which makes connecting with groups of people even easier. But as I said, one of the best things about ESO is the community, so definitely make that effort to connect with other players and you won't be disappointed. Of course, it does have its fair share of trolls, as any, online game would have, but that's what the ignore button is for, right? But the final question you might be asking is, what is next for ESO in 2024? While we will find out more details soon, 2024 is actually the 10-year anniversary of the Elder Scrolls Online, so I expect we might see something pretty big here. ESO just finished its Necrom chapter expansion, which saw players return to some pretty popular locations in the Elder Scrolls lore, including Morrowind and the Daedric Plain of Apocrypha. But we were also promised that the Necrom story isn't quite finished yet. In fact, Necrom was just part 1 of a multi-year story arc that's set to really shake things up in terms of story and narrative for the world of Tamriel. I won't spoil anything here, but as I said, I think we could see something big in 2024 when you also consider it's ESO's 10-year anniversary. Who knows, we might see a change in zone geography or a change in the time period to finally move the game forward into a new era. We might also see things like a new playable race, or one of my favorite ideas, the concept of spellcrafting. But let me know what you think in the comments section. Will you be playing ESO in 2024? And if you are, what are you looking forward to next? You can also check out more of my ESO videos coming up next on screen, including more unique builds and guides for our channel members, like our updated solo unkillable Magicka Arcanist build, which I just updated for the new Endless Archive in ESO, with tons of survivability and damage, so you can solo the hardest content in the game if you want to. If that sounds interesting to you, just click on that join button down below for more information, or click the members link down in the description to see a full list of members only builds and guides. As always, huge shout out to all of our channel members, which make this channel possible. I could not do this without you. So thanks again, and of course, thanks to all of you for watching this video, and I will see you around in the next one.